Hello, welcome to our Tuesday program on June 8th, 2021. I put in a link in there in case you want to put comments when you are on Facebook. This will give you the link in order to put comments on the program. So we are here going through part 3 of A Wander in the Spirit Land. Part 3 is called The Kingdom of Hell. We're on chapter 21, The Fires of Hell. And I put this part 1 because chapter 21 is long. So I might break this up into 3 separate shows. So I'll go through some pages in this one now, and then we will follow on in later Tuesdays. So please leave comments if you have questions, even if they're off track. I always try to answer these questions. In fact, I'm thinking of creating another live stream later on where I can do more live questions from people. Now, again, this book is the Spirit Franchezzo, who died in the late 19th century. He was a very educated person, but not the best of pure spirit. So therefore, he went down in the lower zone, and then his beautiful love of his life, who he just met, and he was just torn because he was taken away from her, helped him make his character better, and he rose into the spirit world through lots of trials and tribulations. If you go back and look at my earlier episodes of this book, and now he's actually part of a team that is going to help other people who are in what he calls hell, what Spiritism calls the dark abyss. Now, the dark abyss, according to Spiritism, starts at the crust of the earth and goes down. If you want to look at that in a geometrical, relationship, geographical relationship, also, and then of course the lower zone, which starts at the crust of the earth, goes up to the lowest level of heaven. That's what they call in Spiritism. And also, I want to make sure that there is no eternal punishment. People may think they're eternally punished. That's part of their correction for the wrongdoing, but there is none. Once you change your character and your attitude, you will be helped. Now, this is a prime example of a spirit, Franchezzo, who is part of a team to go down and help a person who is starting to think, I don't like it here very much. I don't want to be in this horrible place. Now, why did that person go in the horrible place in the beginning? Well, because of the law of affinity, where like goes to like. So if you're a nice person, kind and gentle, you don't have to be a saint, but you go where other nice, kind, gentle are. And it's probably in one of the lower levels of heaven. If you are a very materialistic person and you are very selfish in your life, you probably go somewhere in the lower zone where there are other people like you. If you are a real criminal and you harm people and you cheat people and you treat people like dirt only for your own benefit, then you probably go down into the dark abyss, or as Franchezzo calls hell, should call it purgatory since it's temporary. So that's where we're at. And of course, I will take this book and I will show what he says and how how Spiritism, which was codified by Allan Kardec in the 1850s. Let me bring that up. From 1,019 questions to spirits. And what he did is he went through and he asked different mediums the same questions and didn't use the answers unless they were the same or similar. So therefore, he really talked to all. Now, he had been commissioned this work by the Spirit of Truth as promised by Jesus in the New Testament. So again, this is what Spiritism calls the third revelation, the first being Moses, bringing down the 10 Commandments. The second is Jesus, the New Testament. And the third is Allan Kardec, the Spirit's book, and his other books. Now, Spiritism wants you to know, though, they don't believe in a complete static reading. Spirits have told Allan Kardec that the Bible, the Old and New Testament, the passages that are full of love, charity, and fraternity are eternal. But many other passages are those communicated to the humans at the time on the planet according to their culture and level of technology. So a lot of cruel things you've seen in the Bible, things that we think is wrong now, had to be done because those people could not have comprehended or would have rejected any other type of message. So it could only be according. So the spirit world doesn't revolutionize. They help people think for themselves. They try to give people evolutionary steps. So that's why, when people say, well, the Bible is all full of these terrible things. Oh, yes, but that's, there's, when they say go into this town and kill everybody, well, that's what people understood back then. They wanted to teach them to start taking direct orders from the spirit world. They had to learn to do that. As they became more mature, Jesus came and said, okay, now we need to enter love. Might does not make right. These were foreign concepts 2,000 years ago. Socrates was killed 400 years ago because he said might doesn't make right. That did not compute with people. But as we go and we mature, of course, the spirit world guidance, above and above. That's what happens. Okay, let's get into this then. This is chapter 21, The Fires of Hell. Away before me stretched a narrow path, and curious to see where it would lead, I followed it, sure that it would somehow lead me to those whom I could help. So he was in this, first in chapter 20, he was in this city, and he went and he talked to the emperor of the city, and the emperor wanted to destroy him if he could, right, make him a slave. He escaped, and he was taken up into a different area. Before he escaped, there was this one person that he could tell who did not like the atmosphere of that place, and he knew that he was there to help him. But then he was taken away because they were chasing him, because they also told him don't eat or drink anything, because Franchezzo is not a high spirit yet. He's still not in the levels of heaven. He's probably up in the higher levels of the lower zone, and he's learning, and he's doing a great job, but he doesn't have that complete wall of faith and fortitude to go after these very, like the emperor on the city in hell, very dominant spirits. Okay. After following it for a short time, I came to the foot of a range of black mountains, and before me was the entrance to a huge cavern. Horrible reptiles were hanging onto the walls and crawling at my feet. Great funguses and monstrous air plants of an oozy, slimy kind hung in festoons, like ragged shrouds, from the roof, and a dark pool of stagnant water almost covered the floor. I thought of turning away from the spot, but a voice seemed to bid me to go on, so I entered. Of course, now this is how the spirit world works. They send these wonderful people like Franchezzo, who's doing, volunteer work of extreme difficulty, and they're in touch with them constantly, right? They could be a billion miles away, if you look at it physically, and still be completely in touch with them, because remember, the speed of light is not a speed limit in the spirit world. It's a speed of thought. So the team leader, and probably someone above the team leader, is going to be watching him and helping him go on, and they can see everything he's doing. It's just like here on Earth. The spirit world can tell, is constantly, we send out messages of where we are, what we're thinking, and they know everything. So I entered, and skirting around the edge of the dark pool, found myself at the entrance to a small dark passage in the rocks. Down this I went, and turning a corner, saw before me a red light, as if from a fire, while dark forms like goblins passed and repassed it between it and myself. In another moment, I stood at the end of the passage. Before me was a gigantic dungeon-like vault, its uneven rocky roof half revealed and half hidden by the masses of lurid smoke and flames, which arose from an enormous fire blazing in the middle of the cavern. Excuse me. While around it were dancing such a troop of demons as might well typify the devils of hell. With shrieks and yells of laughter, they were prodding at the fire with long black spears and dancing and flinging themselves about in the wildest fashion. While in a corner were huddled together a dozen or so miserable dark spirits, towards whom they made frantic rushes from time to time, as if about to seize and hurl them in the fire, always retreating again with yells and howls of rage. I soon perceived that I was invisible to these beings. So taking courage from that fact, then why was he invisible? So as you rise in the spirit world, now forget our physical world, where almost all matter, very low energy. When you're down in this low levels of purgatory, you are pretty high level of matter compared to high ratio of matter compared to energy. As you go higher and higher, your ratio of energy to matter, right? You're higher, you get lower and actually higher and higher of energy to matter. These people were very low in the ratio of energy to matter. So these people could not see the less dense, the more etheric spirits from high above. He could, if he wanted to, concentrate on himself and tell them, okay, make myself denser so these people can see me. And that's why a lot of people in NDEs, they will have spirits around them and they'll think, well, you know, especially if they went down into the lower zone and then like these spirits came at them and then like ran away. That's because higher spirit made themselves visible to those lower spirits, but to the person who had a near-death experience, they still could not see them because they're even denser than the lower spirits. To my horror, I discovered the fire was composed of the bodies of living men and women who writhed and twisted in the flames and were tossed about by the spheres of those awful demons. I was so appalled by this discovery that I cried out to know if this was a real scene or some horrible illusion of this dreadful place. And the same deep, mysterious voice that had often spoken to me in my wanderings answered me now. Son, they are the living souls who in their earthly lives doomed hundreds of their fellow men to die this dreadful death, and knew no pity, no remorse in doing so. Their own cruelties have kindled these fierce flames of passion and hate in the breast of many of their victims. And in the spirit world, these fiery germs have grown till they are now a fierce flame to consume the oppressors. These fires are fed slowly by the fierce cruelties of those they now consume. There is not here one pang of anguish which has not been suffered 100-fold more in the persons of these spirits' many helpless victims. So think about this for a second. These people's helpless victims. So they have done that to other people. They burned other people to death. Now they are experiencing that. So this is part of the process of our Earth right now, a planet of atonement, where we pay for our past wrongs. So the process is reincarnation. Reincarnation is the moving forward, and then karma, right? Karma helps determine the path. Reincarnation is the engine. Karma is like the steering wheel. It's like, okay, you're going to go this road. Well, these people have done that before. They're going to go down the path of having that happen to them. So they reincarnated. They had some trials and tribulations. They probably didn't learn, or they actually were worse after they were incarnated on Earth. And then they died, and now they are here being unfortunately tortured by the flames. We carry on. From this fire, these spirits will come forth touched by a pity born of their own sufferings for those they have wronged in the past. See, they're going to feel, oh, this might have been the people in the past. This was horrible. I'll never do that again. So this is, you know, they're not being punished. You could say they are, but they're really being educated. The spirit world doesn't punish people to inflict pain for no reason. It's being done to say, okay, this is what you've done. This is why you should never worry about saying, oh, that guy got away with murder, or, you know, that person stole and, you know, they've done horrible things, or that dictator of North Korea, you know, he's just going to go scot-free and live a great life. Well, no, this is all waiting. You know, these things are all waiting these people. Feel sorry for them. Be happy you're not in their place. for those they have wronged in the past, and then will be extended to them the hand of help and the means of progression through deeds of mercy, as many and as great have been their merciless deeds in the past. Do not shudder nor marvel that such retribution as this is allowed to be. The souls of these spirits were so hard, so cruel, that only sufferings felt by themselves could make them pity others. Ever since they left the earth life, they have been only intent upon making others more helpless suffer, till the bitter hatred they have aroused has become at last a torrent which has engulfed themselves. Furthermore, know that these flames are not truly material, although to your eyes and to theirs they appear so. For in the spirit world, that which is mental is likewise objective, and fierce hatred or burning passion does indeed seem a living fire. You shall now follow one of these spirits and see for yourself what seems to you cruel injustice, yet is mercy in disguise. Behold, these passions are burning themselves out, and souls are about to pass into the darkness of the plane beyond. This is all learning experience. Boy, it's a painful learning experience. It's a horrible learning experience, but it is a learning experience. Now, and when he says seems to be objective to you, but it's not really flames. It's the mental image of flames. And this is what we have to understand. And this is what spirits tell us in the writings from the spiritist mediums, is that the earth is objective, meaning that I'm solid. I feel myself solid. I can't think I'm not solid and be not solid. No, I am who I am. I can't put my hand through the wall because the wall doesn't correspond to what I want, right? But when you are in the spirit world, we go from the objective to the subjective, where I can't put my hand through the wall because I want to. I wish it. I desire it. I order it. I can change my look. I can become invisible. I can have long hair. I can become green. I can look like a man, a woman, a child, if I wish, because it is subjective. It follows what I want. Now, many people say, well, in heaven, you create your own heaven. And there's some truth to that, but you have to think of yourself as one of many, and there are higher spirits, and they have ideas of what the level of heaven you're at, and you're with other people who have a fixed idea of the level of heaven you're at, and then all these thoughts come through you, and you're inundated with these thoughts, and therefore it seems normal to you that you accept the world that other people accept, and then probably higher spirits created. Now, when you get higher and you really want to create your own world, you probably can do that. But it's you have your own thoughts. You can make your own house and kind of live within the parameters of this sandbox of what you're given to. You can't change the sandbox yet because you're really not powerful enough. But then they say after this levels of heaven, it goes from the objective to the subjective to the sublime, and there's something even above that. Okay, as the voice ceased, the flames died down, and all was darkness save for a faint bluish light like phosphorus that filled the cavern. And by it I saw the forms of the spirits rise from the ashes of the fire and pass out of the cavern. As I followed them, one became separated from the others, and passing on before me, went into the streets of a city that was near. It seemed to me like one of the old Spanish cities of the West Indies or South America. There were Indians passing along its streets and mingling with Spaniards and men of several nations. Following the spirit through several streets, we came to a large building which seemed to be a monastery of the order of Jesuits, who had helped colonize the country and forced upon the unhappy natives the Roman Catholic religion. In the days when religious persecution was thought by most creeds to be a proof of religious zeal. And then, while I stood watching the spirit, I saw pass before me a panorama of his life. Now, think of this. So Franchezzo, can look at this spirit walk by, and he can read his thoughts and know his beginning, his present, and then probably something with more training, he can look at some of his future. Spirits can do that to us. High spirits can see large parts of our future from the beginning, maybe lives before. Now, these probably spirits hanging around on the lower zone, or are not as high, they're more immature spirits, but they can still see us. They can still see us. They can still read our thoughts and know who we are and know where we are spiritually and know what motivates us, which is good and bad, because bad spirits or ignorant or playful spirits who want to do you harm can impress upon you things like, oh, that's a great idea to go steal that watch or whatever. So that's why you have to learn to filter out everything with your conscience. Okay, so he's looking at this guy and he says, I saw him first chief of his order, sitting as a judge, before whom were brought many poor Indians and heretics. And I saw him condemning them by the hundreds to torture and flames because they would not become converts to his teaching. That's probably when he was in some South American country. I saw him oppressing all who were not powerful enough to resist him and extorting jewels and gold in enormous quantities as tribute to him and to his order. Nice guy. And if any thought to resist him and his demands, he had them arrested and almost without even the pretense of a trial, thrown into dungeons and tortured and burned. I read in his heart a perfect thirst for wealth and power, and an actual love for beholding the sufferings of his victims. And I knew, reading as I seemed to do his innermost soul, that his religion was but a cloak, a convenient name under which to extort the gold he loved and gratify his love of power. How many people are like that? Not just the old Spanish Inquisition. Again, I'll carry on. Again, I saw the great square or marketplace of the city with hundreds of great fires blazing all around. It was like a furnace. And a whole helpless crowd of timid, gentle natives were bound hand and foot and thrown into the flames. And their cries of agonies went up to heaven as this cruel man and his vile accomplices chanted their false prayers and held aloft the sacred cross, which is desecrated by their unholy hands. Their horrible lives of cruelty and vice, and their greed for gold. I saw that this horror was perpetrated in the name of the Church of Christ, of him whose teaching were of love and charity, who came to teach that God was perfect love. And I saw this man who called himself Christ's minister, yet had no thought of pity for one of these unhappy victims. He thought alone of how the spectacle would strike terror to the hearts of other Indian tribes and make them bring him more gold to satisfy his greedy lust. Now, let me stop there for a second. So when people tell me, and quite rightly so, he says, well, religions hurt and killed more people than anything, right? Well, first of all, it hasn't. Governments have hurt and killed, especially governments in the 20th century. Fascism, communism have killed much more. Stalin and Mao has killed tens of millions. But again, the Catholic Church did their part, and because of people like this. And that's when people always say, well, we can just have this form of government, everything will be good. Well, no. The Catholic Church, when it first started with Jesus, I'm sure was full of the greatest people, and they were just nice. But then it became more and more infected. It became more powerful, and when there's power, people like this person wants to grab some of that power and wealth, and they will corrupt that institution. Just like they'll corrupt any type of government, no matter what type of government you think is best. That's why the least government really is the best for us on this earth at this moment, because we are so imperfect. And the more power you give to people, the more that people who aren't nice and who are greedy and selfish will want to be in positions of that power and take what they want for themselves. So therefore, this shows you that, yes, the church became corrupted, governments became corrupted, and here's a prime example of someone who was just a horrible person and just wanted to scare the natives, get more wealth, and just trampled over anyone he could find. In the book, Memoirs of a Suicide, it's a great book. Please buy that book, Memoirs of a Suicide by Yvonne Pereira. Camilo Branco was a well-known writer. They called him the Balzac of Portugal. I think he committed suicide in 1899. I could be wrong about that. But when he went to this kind of hospital for suicides, he was put in this chair, and he said, let's go through your past lives and see why you committed suicide. Well, He committed suicide because he had syphilis, and then it finally caught up to him. Back in those days, it wasn't curable, and he went blind, and he couldn't stand being blind, so he shot himself. So why did he go blind? Well, then he went back more lives and found out that he also was a member of the Spanish Inquisition, and he tortured and he blinded a person, and he blinded a man because he wanted to seduce his wife. So he got the man out of the way by falsely accusing him. And then when he told the guy's wife, said, "Okay, I can let him go, but you have to be with me." And then she did. She goes, "Will you let him go?" And no. And so he kept with her until he got bored with her. And he said, "Okay, I'll let him go." But he said, "But I didn't say I let him go whole." So before he let him go, he burned out his eyes with red hot poker. So of course, now look at his punishment was just to go blind from syphilis. Pretty light punishment for what he did to this guy. So think about that. So your trials and tribulations, if you go through a really tough trial and tribulation, like this really just knocked you for a loop, I would say most probably that you've had trials and tribulation trying to teach you something before that were much lighter, but you ignored it. And therefore, what happens when your child or something ignores a very nice lesson or a nice, like, I don't think you should do that. And then they do it again. Well, the punishment rises to the level where they'll finally pay attention. The same thing with us. So think about that. Okay. Then I beheld this man, reading again, then I beheld this man return to his own land of Spain and reveling in his ill-gotten wealth, a powerful, wealthy prince of the church, venerated by the poor, ignorant populace as a holy man who had gone forth into the Western world beyond the seas to plant the banner of his church and preach the blessed gospel of love and peace, while instead his path had been marked in fire and blood, and then my sympathy for him was gone. Then I saw this man upon his deathbed, and I saw monks and priests chanting mass for his soul that it might go to heaven. And instead I saw drawn down to hell by the chains woven into his wicked life. I saw the great hordes of his former victims awaiting him there, drawn down in their turn by their thirst for revenge, their hunger for power to avenge their sufferings, and the sufferings of those most dear to them. So it's so sad, and that's a lot of spirits are like that, where they want to get revenge. And don't be like that, because now these spirits are down in the lower zone. They're just thinking about revenge all the time, and they're wasting their own time. The spirit world will take care of this guy. They'll make sure he learns. That's their job. You don't have to deliver justice. That's done by people much smarter than we are. I'll carry on. I saw this man in hell surrounded by those he had wronged and haunted by the empty wraith of such as were too good and pure to come to this place of horror or to wish for vengeance on their murderer. This I had seen in the frozen land with the man in the icy cage. And in hell, the only thought of that spirit was rage because his power on earth was no more. His only idea is how he might join with others in hell as cruel as himself and thus still oppress and torture. If he could have doomed his victims to death a second time, he would have done it. In his heart there was neither pity nor remorse, only anger that he was so powerless. Had he possessed one feeling of sorrow or one thought of kindness for another, it would have helped him and created a wall between himself and these vengeful spirits. And his sufferings, though they might be great, would not have at last assumed the physical aspect in which I had beheld them. As it was, his passion of cruelty was so great, it fed and fanned into fresh life the spiritual flames which theirs created, till at last, when I saw him first, they were dying out, exhausted by their own violence. These demons I had beheld were the last and most fierce of his victims, in whom the desire for revenge was even then not fully satisfied, while those who I had beheld crouching in the corner were some who, no longer desirous of tormenting him themselves, had yet been unable to withdraw themselves from beholding his sufferings and those of his accomplices. So, this guy is bad. We would, many people call him evil, and we don't like to use the word evil because really evil is the absence of good. Now, even this person will become good someday. It may take 1,000 years. It may take a long time. But he will recognize that someday. And that's why when you see someone you think is not a good person, that is important to think about that. So that is kind of where he is at right now. He's watching this and he's like, this is not easy. Okay, I'll carry on. Well, let me I'm going to put a comment. Oh, I'll do that. Okay, let me carry on. And now I beheld the spirit with the newly awakened thought of repentance, returning to the city to warn others of his Jesuit fraternity and try to turn them from the path of his own errors. He did not yet realize the length of time that elapsed since he had left the earth life, nor that this city was the spiritual counterpart of the one he lived in on earth. In time, I was told he would be sent back to earth to work as a spirit in helping to teach mortals the pity and mercy he had not shown in his own life. But first, he'd have to work here in this dark place, striving to release the souls of those whom his crimes have dragged down with him. Thus, I left the man at the door of that building, which was a counterpart of his earthly house, and passed on myself through the city. So see, the spirit world takes care of these things. Spirit world is like, okay, now, if you've done that before, now your job is to help and show what you had done wrong in the first place and not let others do what you had done. It's all educational. It's all, everything is for one goal. When people ask, why is this world so cruel and chaotic? It's all for one goal. It's to make us all better people, to make us pure spirits one day. They go, yeah, but you know, why does it have to be so chaotic and equitable? And then my other answer is, okay, it's one word or maybe two words, but with a hyphen. Free will is, God doesn't say, and Jesus doesn't say, okay, you have to be good, and I'm going to change your mind, or I'm going to just beat the heck out of you if you're not good. No, we have to decide to be good. We have to decide to be honorable. We have to decide to be charitable, fraternal, and selfless, and want to service others. That has to become within us. We can't have rules outside, because then you just adhere to the rules. You don't change your character and your attitude. You're just thinking yourself like, okay, I'll just do what I'm told, otherwise I get punished. No, that's not what the spirit world wants. They want you to do good for its own sake, for it's the enjoyment of doing good. And there's been studies done that when people who help others, they're much happier, less stressed, they live longer. Life is better for them. Whereas taking advantage of others has the opposite effect. Okay, now carry on. Like the Roman city, this one was disfigured and its beauties blotted out by the crimes of which it had been the silent witness. And to me, the air seemed full of dark phantom forms, wailing and weeping and dragging after them their heavy chains. The whole place seemed built upon living graves and shrouded in a dark red mist of blood and tears. It was like one vast prison house whose walls were built of deeds of violence and robbery and oppression. As I wandered on, I had a waking dream and saw the city as it had been on earth ere the white man had set his foot upon its soil. I saw peaceful, primitive people living upon fruits and grains and leading their simple lives in an innocence akin to that of childhood, worshiping the great supreme under a name of their own, yet nonetheless worshiping him in spirit and in truth. Their simple faith and their patient virtues, the outcome of the inspiration given to them from that great spirit, who is universal and belongs to no creeds, no churches. Then I saw white men come thirsting for gold and greedy to grasp the goods of others, and these simple people welcomed them like brothers, and in their innocence showed them the treasures they had gathered from the earth, gold and silver and jewels. Then I saw the treachery which marked the path of the white men, how they plundered and killed the simple natives, how they tortured and made slaves of them, forcing them to labor in the mines till they died by thousands, how all faith, all promises were broken by the white man till the peaceful, happy country was filled with tears and blood. So one would say, well, how could the spirit world allow these, innocent people to be used and tortured by these, this cruel race of people? Well, a reaction is a reaction. These nice natives may have been cruel people of the Spanish Empire earlier, the Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, the Chinese Empire that enslaved people, took advantage of people. Then they were incarnated into someplace, let's say in South America, that was Spain had their colonies, living a good life. And then all of a sudden these people came and just ruined them. Well, they had done that to others before. There's nothing happens without a reason. It's sad. So why couldn't they just let them become innocent and into this pristine environment? Well, another good question. And that is because the spirit world wants us to be morally advanced, right? Which you can do without technology, but they also want us to be technologically advanced. So this is kind of how, and I talk about this in my book, How We Are Guided. And this is we are guided to become morally and technologically advanced. Now, it doesn't happen in concert, right? Because the spirits have said we're in our most dangerous phase right now as we're getting to become a planet of regeneration versus a planet of atonement. Is we are like at the height of materialism, where science knows everything, and there's no such thing as God, there's no such thing as the spirit world, and if you believe in that, you're an idiot. Well, that will reverse. People will start understanding, like, no, these things happen. You can't explain it. Science doesn't know everything. I have faith, not based on just what I'm told, but on my own observation, because that's what Spiritism wants. They don't want you to have blind faith. They want you to say, in your own experiences, like maybe your Aunt Edna had this vision and told you some of your future, and now it's come true. Like, okay, how could Aunt Edna know that? I've had people say they were on a road and they were told, slow down, there's going to be a deer ahead. They slowed down and a deer bounced in front of their truck. So then people start saying, oh, okay, there's something going on here that's not explainable. And that's what, you need to look at with your own eyes, your own ears. As Jesus said, if you have eyes to see and ears to hear, you'll understand me. And that's what is hopefully happening to most of you. Then I beheld, I'll start again. Then I beheld far away in Spain a few good, true, kindly men whose souls were pure and who believed that they alone had the true faith by which only man can be saved and live eternally, who thought that God had given this light to but one small spot of his earth, and had left all the rest in darkness and error, had left countless thousands to perish because this light had been denied to them, but given exclusively to that one small spot of earth, that small section of his people. I thought that these good and pure men were so sorry for those who, they thought, were in the darkness and error of a false religion, that they set forth and crossed that unknown ocean to that strange, faraway land, to carry with them their system of religion, and to give it to those poor simple people whose lives had been so good and gentle and spiritual under their own faith, their own beliefs. I saw these good but ignorant priests land on this strange shore, and beheld them working everywhere amongst the natives, spreading their own belief and crushing out and destroying all traces of a primitive faith as worthy of respect as their own. These priests were kind, good men who sought to alleviate the physical lot of the poor oppressed natives, even while they labored for their spiritual welfare also. And on every side there sprang up missions, churches, and schools. Then I beheld great numbers of men, priests, as well as many others, come over from Spain, eager, not for the good of the church, nor to spread the truths of their religion, but only greedy for the gold of this new land, and for all that could minister to their own gratification, men whose lives had disgraced them in their own country, till they were obliged to fly to this strange one to escape the consequences of their misdeeds. I saw these men arrive in hordes and mingle with those whose motives were pure and good, till they had outnumbered them, and then thrust the good aside, and made themselves tyrannical masters over the unhappy natives, in the name of the Holy Church of Christ. Now, this Franchezzo just said this is the trajectory of all institutions. Institutions come, they're usually good, and with good people with good thoughts and good motivation behind them, and tell other people, like he's talking about, that, oh, okay, I can use this to make money. I can use this to enslave other people, take advantage of other people. This is what happens when we live in a planet of atonement, where we have more people who are not good versus good. Chico Xavier said about 30% of people who die will go to heaven. That means 70% of people will go in the lower zone or the dark abyss. They're not the best character and personality. Someday they will be, but right now they're not. Now, but we are going to a planet of regeneration. But we're at the beginning, but there are things going to have to happen on this earth to make people get themselves more spiritual. And they're really not going to make that turn, that corner, till we get over 50%. Because here, remember, he said, till they outnumber them. Well, we have to have the good and kind, charitable and fraternal and honest people outnumber the not so honest people. And then those good people will say, no, I'm sorry, I know who you are. Now, you need to change your attitude and your character, or you're out. Right? So this is how we're going to become a true planet regeneration, is when we have more good souls on earth than ignorant ones. I don't want to say bad, but ignorance. I carry on. And then I saw the Inquisition brought to the unhappy land and established as the last link in the chain of slavery and oppression, thus riveted round this unhappy people, till it swept almost all of them from the face of the earth. And everywhere I beheld the wild thirst, the greed for gold that consumed, as with a fire of hell, all who sought that land. Blind were most of them to all of its beauties but its gold, deaf to all thought but how they might enrich themselves with it. And in the madness of that time, and that awful craving for wealth, was the city of hell, the spiritual counterpart of the earthly city built, stone upon stone, particle by particle, forming itself, and the city of earth change of attractions, which had drawn down one by one each of its wicked inhabitants. For truly, the earthly lives are building for each man and woman in their spiritual habitations. Thus, all these monks and priests, all these fine ladies, all these soldiers and merchants, yea, and even these unhappy natives, have been drawn down to hell by the deeds of their earthly lives, by the passions and hatreds, the greed of gold, the bitter sense of wrongs unrequited, and the thirst for revenge with which those deeds had created. Very true. See, this is why the more you keep yourself above these passions, and the more you keep yourself free of the thirst for revenge and these primitive emotions and want to take advantage of other people, the better off you are going to be. There's going to be, nothing better than you trying to forgive everyone, and your stress levels are going to go way down. As Jesus said, forgive 70 times 70. Jesus wants you to be happy, wants you to forgive these things. We'll carry on. At the door of a large square building, whose small grated windows looked like a prison, I stooped, arrested by the cries and shouts which came from it. Then, guided by the mysterious voice of my unseen guide, I entered and followed the sounds, which soon came to a dungeon cell. Here I found a great number of spirits surrounding a man who was chained to the wall by an iron griddle round his waist. His wild, glaring eyes, disheveled hair, and tattered clothing suggested that he had been there for many years, while the hollow, sunken cheeks and the bones sticking through his skin told that he was, to all appearance, dying of starvation. Yet I knew that here there was no death, no relief from such suffering. Exactly, you can't die. There's another story where this man went down into hell. He was taken up on the stage. He was actually cut into parts. And then they were done, they threw the parts into the cave. And then he said, well, I woke up and I was reassembled. That's because it's all mental, right? You're immortal, you can't die. And as they cut him, there was no blood. So this is not the nice area you want to be in. That's why any sacrifice you make on earth to become a better person, is what spirits tell us, you'll be rewarded 100-fold in heaven. And you don't want the opposite. There's a lot of incentive, and that's how they work. They have incentive for you. You have to motivate yourself to get that in that reward. And yes, it sounds like you're bribing a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, but that kind of has to be done to a certain extent to get people to go, look, there's a better place. There's a wonderful place with wonderful people, and you'll enjoy it. Why are you on earth being a not nice person? And when you pass over, you're going to be with other not nice people. Is that what you want? And you really don't. Okay, yet I knew here there was no death, no such relief from suffering. Near him stood another man with folded arms and bowed head, whose wasted features and skeleton forms scarred with many wounds made him an even more pitiable object than the other, though he was free while the other was chained to the wall. Around both of them danced and yelled other spirits, all wild and savage and degraded. Some of them were Indians, a few Spanish, and one or two who looked, I thought, like Englishmen. Oh, going too far. What happened? All of them were at the same work, throwing sharp knives at the chained man that never seemed to hit him, shaking their fists in his face, cursing and reviling him, yet strange to say, never able to actually touch him. All the time he stood chained to the wall, unable to move or get away from them. And there stood the other man silently watching him. That's interesting. Why could the knives hit him? Let's look at this. As I stood looking at this scene, I became conscious of the past history of those two men. I saw the one who was chained to the wall in a handsome house like a palace, and knew he had been one of the judges sent out from Spain to preside over the so-called courts of justice, which had but proved additional means for extorting money from the natives and oppressing all who sought to interfere with the rich and powerful. I saw the other man who had been a merchant living in a pretty villa with a very beautiful wife and one little child. This woman had attracted the notice of the judge, who had conceived an unholy passion for her, and on her persistently repulsing of all his advances, he made an excuse to have the husband arrested on suspicion by the Inquisition and thrown into prison. Then he carried off the poor wife and so insulted her that she died, and the poor little child was strangled by the order of the cruel judge. Meantime, the unfortunate husband lay in prison, ignorant of the fate of his wife and child, and of the charge under which he had been arrested, growing more and more exhausted from the scanty food and horrors of the dungeon, and more desperate from the suspense. At last he was brought before the council of the Inquisition, charged with heretical practices and conspiracy against the crown, and on denial of these charges was tortured to make him confess and give up the names of certain friends who were accused of being his accomplices. As the poor man, bewildered and indignant, still protested his innocence, he was sent back to the dungeon and there slowly starved to death. The cruel judge, not daring to set him at liberty, well knowing that he would make the city ring with the story of his wrongs and of his wife's fate when he should learn it. And so this poor man had died, but he did not join his wife, who, poor injured soul, had passed at once with her little innocent child into the higher spheres. She was so good and pure and gentle that she had even forgiven her murderer, for such he was, though he had not intended to kill her. And between her and the husband she had so dearly loved, there was a wall created by his bitter revengeful feelings against the man who had destroyed them both. Now this is a great lesson. This poor guy who had this beautiful wife and child, if he had forgiven all, which I know, look, I know this would be hard to do, hard for anybody. But the more you understand Spiritism, you can do it. And the more you can understand that the spirit world, God and Jesus, takes care of karma, it's easier for you to do that. I remember before I became a spiritist, I saw this father outside, and the murder of his daughter was going to be executed. And he says, "Oh, I forgive him." And I thought to myself, oh, I'd never forgive him. That guy is weak. That's what I thought. And that was wrong. That man, the father, had more love and more intelligence than I did at the time. He's much spiritually superior. For he knew that things must have been arranged for God, by God, for a purpose. And that's what there is. Let me carry on. When this poor wronged husband died, his soul could not leave the earth. It was tied there by his hatred of the enemy and his thirst for revenge. His own wrongs he might have forgiven, but the fate of his wife and child had been too dreadful. He could not forgive that. Before even his love for his wife came this hate. A day and night his spirit clung fast to the judge, seeking for the chance of vengeance, and at last it came. Devils from hell, such as the one that once tempted me, clustered round the wrong spirit and taught it how, through the hand of a mortal, it could strike the assassin's dagger to the judge's heart. And there, when death severed the body and the spirit, he could drag that down with him to hell. So terrible had been this craving for revenge, nursed through the waiting years of solitude in prison and in the spirit land, that the poor wife had tried in vain to draw near her husband and soften his heart with better thoughts. Her gentle soul was shut out by the wall of evil drawn around this unhappy man. He had also had no hope of ever seeing her again. He deemed that she had gone to heaven and was lost to him forevermore. So, I think I'll read this last paragraph and then we'll be done for tonight. A Roman Catholic of the narrow view, held nearly 200 years ago when this man had lived, he believed that being under the ban of priests and denied the administration of the church when he died was the reason he was of the eternally lost, while his wife and child must be with the angels of heaven. Is it wonderful then that all this poor spirit's thought should center in the desire for vengeance, and that he should plan only how to make his enemy suffer as he had been made to suffer? Thus, then it was he who inspired a man on earth to kill the judge. His hand guided the mortals with so unerring an aim that the judge fell pierced to his false, cruel heart. The earthly body died, but an immortal soul lived and awakened to find itself in hell, chained to a dungeon wall as he had chained his victim, and face to face with him at last. So I will end there for today. And I hope this helps everyone kind of understand the spirit world. This is kind of the underbelly of the spirit world. If you really want to start understanding more about Spiritism, where we're guided and we're loved, is I would begin with reading my book, Spiritism 101, The Third Revelation. You can get that on my website in PDF for free. So download it, go to my website, nwspiritism.com. You'll find on the right-hand navigation bar. I also have it in French in PDF for free. Of course, if you want, you can get it on Kindle, in paperback also, and then in Audible form. Then after that, I would recommend that you read the Spirits book. By reading Spiritism 101, you've got a pretty good understanding. Then you can read with more, I believe, that all depends on what you want, of course, with more comprehension and understanding, the Spirits book, which was published in the 1850s, with those 1,019 questions. And then if you are more advanced and really want to understand the spirit realm, the physical realm, what is a spirit, how a spirit ascends, what you are physically, what does that mean to be in the physical form, how reincarnation and karma works, how our lives are guided, how old cultures and nations are guided, I would recommend you read my book, The Spirit Realm, Spiritism Has Revealed the Reality of Our Existence.